we're going to be looking at some more complex functions that we want to graph. And as we look at this polynomial function here, there are some clues hidden within the structure that will allow us to be able to graph it fairly decently without a graphing utility. And that's because we're starting to build our tool belt full of understanding of things that are associated with these various functions. So one of the things that we want to begin identifying is something called end behavior. What does the end behavior of this particular graph look like? Just lots of functions, do a couple of wiggles and whatnot. But outside of the wiggles, the graph continues in that direction without any more wiggles. That's its end behavior. And so we can determine some things by its end behavior. And how we determine that is we want to identify on a particular function two things. We want to identify is the leading coefficient positive or negative, and we want to determine what's the index of its highest coefficient or its highest term. In this case, it's a cubed term. Those two things tell us a couple of things. First of all, since it is a positive number, this tells me that the graph rises left to right. It's an increasingly positive graph over time. The second piece of information it tells me is how many wiggles or how many curves this particular graph have. And it tells me that this graph has a curve of 3 minus 1. So we look at our highest index, subtract 1 from it, and that tells you how many changes of directions a particular graph has. So if I looked at end behavior on this particular graph, I discovered that over time it rises and it changes directions 2 times. So it rises, changes directions once, twice, and then continues out. Now, where this exact graph lies at, we'll have to find out later by looking at its x-intercepts and its y-intercepts. But for right now, let's just get a handle on what is its end behavior. And its end behavior determines what happens way, way, way down here and way, way, way up there. And how we determine that is by looking at the leading term, or the highest term, which is an x cubed. Is it positive? Well, then it tells me that the graph rises left to right. If it's the index is a 3, we determine how many wiggles by subtracting 1 from that, so it changes directions or has 2 wiggles. And that helps to determine the general shape of what that graph looks like.